What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? D-backs barely escape Houston, and if things continue, should Torey Lovullo be on the hot seat?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we'll be talking about the D-backs barely escaping Houston, checking in on the panic meter, and should Torey Lovullo be on the hot seat? Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Now let's get into the podcast and let's talk about that D-backs versus Astros series. I think I forgot to mention, thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's talk about that D-backs versus Astros series because Houston, we have a problem because D-backs barely escape out of Houston. They're on their way back to Arizona. Thankfully, after not the best road trip by the boys, you did beat the Giants, thankfully, but this series against Houston was not the best as the pitching problems persist for the D-backs, and that is where you have to start when talking about this series, but I actually don't want to start there. We'll put that number 2. I want to start this conversation by talking about something positively by just saying, shout out to Pavin Smith. I have given him, I feel like, a lot of grief on this podcast. I've been very upset at times when I've seen Torey Lovullo put him too high in the lineup. And now all of a sudden, Pavin Smith is starting to bat well. He's starting to, it's crazy. When Pavin Smith bats well, he's batting 7th. And then when he's struggling, he's like batting cleanup for the D-backs, right? Or he's batting leadoff. Like, why when Pavin Smith is actually having a decent season is when Torey Lovullo puts him in the furthest down the lineup. And I'm not mad when Pavin Smith is batting 7th. I just think it's funny. The last 3 years, this was like a top 4 guy in the lineup, and now he's finally having a decent season. And his best game of his career comes when he's batting 7th because he was the MVP on Sunday. And really, the second half of the D-backs lineup was the MVP because 2 for 4 with 2 runs and RBI from McCarthy in the finale. Eugenio Suarez, 4 for 5, 4 runs scored, 2 RBIs, and I don't know if there's ever been a more insane turnaround than Eugenio. And then Pavin Smith, 3 for 4, 3 runs scored, 8 RBIs, 3 home runs, almost had the home run cycle where he had a 2-run home run, a grand slam, and solo shot? Like, was he just missing the 3-run bomb, I think, or either the 2-run bomb? He was just missing one of them. He was close to the home run cycle. Probably the best game anyone's ever had off Justin Verlander in their career. Yes, he's a little bit older, but he's still JV. So great job to see Pavin Smith and the offense come alive on Sunday. The offense struggled in game number 1, but overall, this was a fine series for the offense. The biggest issue for the D-backs is they just feel like they're leaving way too many runners in scoring position. They were good in the finale, but game 2, 2 for 10 with runners in scoring position. 0 for 3 runner scoring position on in game number 1. And over just like the last 3 weeks with guys being hurt, so many dudes in and out the lineup, it feels like that consistency of driving in runs has been a little bit more hit or miss at times. But the last 2 games against Houston was really good. And for the D-backs, the offense is not where I'm concerned. As the playoffs getting closer and more near, the pitching right now is the biggest problem for Arizona, and I think it's time to hit code red on our pitchers right now. I know Gallen and Kelly are coming off their couple of their best starts, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, but Brandon Pfaadt, Game number one, like we've talked about, it feels like he's hit a wall in the second half of the season. He has not been the same guy over the last few weeks, the last couple months. 4.2 innings pitched, 4 earned runs in game number one against Houston. This was a guy, when you looked at like his first 12, 13 starts of the season, like was one of the league leaders in innings pitched in the National League. But like every start, 6, 7 innings deep. But now he's giving you more 4 or 5, pitching into the 6 because he's hitting a little bit of a wall. Maybe there's some arm fatigue. Like again, Brendan Pfaadt, like when these young pitchers get called up, yes, there's a certain level of guy who can immediately get called up and then pitch every day like it's no problem. But there's some other guys that might need to build up the arm strength. And for a guy like Brendan Pfaadt, first big league season, first major league season from start to finish, maybe his arm strength is not there yet where he can make 200 innings or close to that in a regular season, because Brendan Pfaadt is going to end the season with some pretty big innings pitch numbers. He's definitely going to lead the D-backs, it seems like, in innings pitch. He's been healthy all season. If not Brendan Pfaadt, Ryan Nelson actually might be kind of close, but he's at 28 starts right now, 165 innings pitched. If he gets to 32, 33 starts, like, yeah, Brendan Pfaadt's going to be right at 200 innings pitched for this season. And being a young guy, second year in the league, first full season, yeah, he might be experiencing a little bit of arm fatigue and might need to build up some of that strength as we get to the postseason. So maybe going back to like a 6-man rotations, not too bad of an idea. Maybe you do pitch him with a Jordan Montgomery like you did do in game number one. You complement those two guys more so Pfaadt can save his arm a little bit as we enter to the playoffs. The issue is Jordan Montgomery, again, bad outing in game number one, 4 earned runs and 3 innings pitched. That's his issue. He just isn't good. And so when you think about the D-backs pitching, that's their problem. Pfaadt all of a sudden hitting a wall. Jordan Montgomery continues to be bad. Look at game number two. Erod again, 4 earned runs, 4 innings pitched. He just continues to labor every start. 49 strikes on 88 pitches. His efficiency had just been bad this season. He just doesn't throw a ton of strikes, and he doesn't pitch deep into ball games, which is an issue right now for the D-backs. Again, you look at like a game number two. You look at the pen. Floro, problem all season since being acquired. 5 earned runs in his outing against the Houston Astros. And then Slade, of course, gave up an earned run later in that game. I got to think about this D-backs bullpen. Slade, I'm not a fan of. Paul Sewald is definitely shaky. Floro's not feeling good. Like, those are the weakest links. Jordan Montgomery, like, at one point right after the deadline, we were like, the bullpen has no weaknesses. And all of a sudden, the weaknesses are starting to creep up, not just in the rotation, but the bullpen once again. And then in the finale, our guy who's been the best starter for the D-backs the last 2.5 months, Ryan Nelson, even he looked mortal this past weekend. 4.2 innings pitched, 5 earned runs. Thankfully, the bullpen, Ginkle, Puck, and Thompson all did their job. Sewald did give up an earned run late, but for the most part, this rotation, it just needs to start pitching better. Thoughts I feel fine about for the most part. I think it's more of a fatigue thing. I think if you try to build in some rest for the rest of the regular season, I think he can be fine for the postseason. I'm not worried about him too much. What I am worried is like the Erods of the world. Is he ever going to turn it around? Is Jordan Montgomery just going to be a reliever for the rest of the season? Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, are they going to be building off the most recent starts that they had? Like Ryan Nelson, what I've seen the last few months, like I have the most trust in Ryan Nelson right now. But again, at the end of the day, he's still Ryan Nelson. So how much trust do you have in him? Really? This D-backs rotation on paper, loaded with talent, but talent right now is not living up to their potential. So this D-backs rotation needs to turn it around. It's problem numero uno right now. And the D-backs in danger of missing the postseason if this rotation does not get together. And we'll talk about the danger of the D-backs missing the postseason with the panic meter in segment number 2. But hey, never panic about missing parts for your vehicle because you have eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss the panic meter. We're bringing it back. I retired the panic meter at one point. We made it the belief meter at another point because remember, at the first, basically when Corbin Carroll and Eugenio Suarez were struggling, this D-backs team was below 500, right? They started to get hot near the All-Star break, but as you enter July, right, we finished June, and the D-backs were like a below 500 team. I think on June 27th, they were like 4 games below 500 or something. At that point, we were doing the panic meter. We had it like a 6 or a 7. We were like, are the D-backs really going to miss the postseason? Like, the vibes were low. And then the D-backs got hot. They became the best team in baseball over the next 2 months. They looked so good. I was like, it's time to retire the panic meter. And actually, because this team is so hot, they continue this rate, they might steal the NL West. So we reformatted the panic meter into the belief meter, the odds of the D-backs taking the NL West. And I think that crescendoed and peaked at number 6 at one point when we were entering that week against the Mets and the LA Dodgers. And we were talking like, man, if the D-backs have a good week, win 5 of these next 7 games, they look like they could actually take the division from the Dodgers, especially if they take 3 out of 4 from the Dodgers in that series. It looks like the D-backs would potentially be in the driver's seat to win the NL West. The D-backs, of course, lost 3 out of 4 to the Dodgers. They have fallen so far back in the NL West standings, and they've struggled so much actually over the last 2 to 3 weeks that it's time to reformat the belief meter. We're going back to the panic meter now because the odds of the D-backs missing the postseason are actually realistic right now. I know at one point I was like, there's no chance the D-backs probably miss the playoffs. I was at 99% confident the D-backs are making it to the postseason, but I don't know if you can do that anymore because right now the Braves and the New York Mets are tied for the third wild card spot, and the D-backs only have a game and a half lead on both of those teams. Now, silver lining, Padres only a half game up on the D-backs. So there is a world where you could say D-backs, Mets, and Braves make it to the postseason, and maybe a week of bad baseball from the Padres, who the D-backs still play one more time. Maybe the D-backs can knock the Padres out the playoffs. There is a world where the D-backs can knock the Padres out the postseason, and maybe they host the Mets or the Braves in the wild card round. That is possible, but right now, with how the D-backs are playing and considering the Padres have the most wins in baseball since the All-Star break, I actually have the panic meter at a 7 for the D-backs. I think it is pretty, not DEFCON 1 yet, but pretty close because the Padres, as we just mentioned, have been the hottest team in baseball since the All-Star break. The Mets, incredibly hot, 9-1 in their last 10 games. They've gone on a heater. The Braves are just kind of keeping status, just chugging along. They're doing fine. But this D-backs team has really started to struggle recently. And like we said, the pitching has been a big problem for Arizona. And so this is a time where the D-backs have to get hot right now. They have to win as many games as possible. At least win as many games as the Mets and the Mets and the Braves. Like that's all the D-backs actually have to do. You have to match wins with those guys, follow along in the standings, and match wins with those guys to make it to the postseason. Because with the way the D-backs pitching is going right now, I am getting very nervous about the D-backs postseason chances. I still want to believe in this team. It's still getting healthy. Marte just returned. Walker just returned. Gurriel's probably not too far away. Don't know too much about the status of Gabriel Moreno. Gallen just had a good start. Kelly just had a good start. So maybe you could talk yourself into seeing this team getting better moving forward for the rest of the season as it gets healthy, as guys start to build momentum after being on the injured list so long. But the D-backs have to start doing that because the Padres are handling their business, the Mets are handling their business, and the Braves are doing just enough. Meanwhile, the D-backs are starting to struggle, and I would not feel very good at all if the D-backs miss the postseason. That's why we're going to have a conversation, segment number 3, about if Torey Lovullo should be on the hot seat or not, depending on this final month of the season. But you could alleviate all your stress and worries by handling your next opponent, the Texas Rangers. And for this D-backs team who, like we just mentioned, needs to win as many games as possible the next 3 weeks. A great confidence boost for this Arizona team to reignite a little flame as they get closer to the postseason might be to take down the team that beat you in the World Series. If you need just a little bit of spark, if you're like the D-backs, you're like, yes, we know how much the season means to us, but we're just struggling a little bit right now, going through those dog days of the season when it's like when you're on a long road trip, right? 10-hour road trip, 12-hour road trip, however long, and you hit that final hour of your drive and you're just so antsy, you're so anxious, and you're just like, I want to get there already. That could be the D-backs. A long season. You played so well for so long. Now it's the final stretch. You could be hitting a little bit of a mental and physical wall right now that you need to persevere through. So you know what could really help you in that situation? Going against the team that beat you in the World Series and getting some redemption. And the Rangers have also done a good job of beating the D-backs already this season. They're 2-0 against the D-backs this season already. And so for Arizona, who lost to them in the World Series and then lost to them once already this year, this could be a great opportunity for the D-backs to get their revenge. And going against the Texas Rangers in the first 2 games, Zach Allen in game number 1, Merrill Kelly in game number 2, a repeat of the World Series, the first 2 games, at least for the D-backs side. And so this could be a great opportunity for those guys to get their comeuppance. Merrill Kelly did get the W in his start against the Rangers in the World Series, so maybe he doesn't have doesn't have anything to prove. But Zach Allen, who struggled in the postseason, did have his best start in that finale against the Texas Rangers in the World Series, but lost, I'm sure, as the starting pitcher who was in the final game of the season that the D-backs lost. I'm sure Zach Allen is going to want to take it to the Rangers and get a big victory on Tuesday. And so I am really looking forward to this matchup. We need to see if the D-backs pitchers can build momentum off what they did most recently, because Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly are both coming off one of their most impressive starts of the season. Gallen coming off the pseudo no-hitter, 6 innings, no hits, 4 walks though, but 8 strikeouts. Can he build off that? If he has back-to-back starts where he looks dominant, like where he just looked in his most recent start, that would make us feel great about Zach Gallen moving forward. 0 earned runs in 2 of his last 3 starts. So if we could get a third one, I would feel great about Gallen moving forward. Same with Merrill Kelly, who has been really struggling recently, but in his most recent start, again, 7 innings, 2 earned runs, 8 strikeouts. Both of those guys have been really good in their past starts. So let's see them continue to build momentum. Both of those guys haven't had long stretches this season of health. Both of them have been in and off the injured list or have been on it for a very long time. So let's hope after coming off a very good start by both of them, they can build off that momentum and give us some confidence for the rest of September. And now I want to talk about Torey Lovullo and if he should be on the hot seat depending on if the D-backs miss the postseason, in segment number 3. And if you want to bet on the D-backs making it to the playoffs, then the place you need to go, of course, is going to be FanDuel, because you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com, download America's #1 sportsbook, My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. Give me the D-backs money line. Give me the RBI on Eugenio Suarez, and give me the over on total bases for Corbin Carroll. When it hits, it brings a big smile to my face. If you want a big smile on your face, just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, all right, all right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's talk about Torey Lovullo and if he should be on the hot seat for the D-backs. And this is more contingent on what happens in the final month of the season, because if the D-backs make it to the playoffs, Torey Lovullo does not need to be on the hot seat. The hot seat is only warm right now, depending on how these next few weeks can go. Because if Torey Lovullo and this D-backs team collapse in the month of September and miss the postseason, I do think you have a credible case to letting go Torey Lovullo. I don't think the D-backs would actually do that, but I do think they have a credible case to letting him go. But if he makes it to the postseason, there's no way the D-backs let him go, because the D-backs have only gone to the postseason in consecutive years once in their franchise's history. 0-1, they won the World Series, and then 0-2, they went back to the playoffs. Outside of that, the D-backs have never gone to the playoffs back-to-back years. So if they do it this year, it'll be the first time it'll be only the second time in the D-backs franchise history that they've gone to the postseason in consecutive years. And Torey Lovullo would then have 3 postseason appearances on his resume as a D-backs manager, the most of any D-backs manager. So you could literally say, I guess, statistically speaking, Torey Lovullo would probably be the best manager in D-backs franchise history. I mean, he has the manager of the year, the most playoff appearances, and also a World Series appearance. I mean, the numbers might say he's the best manager, but I can also say if Torey Lovullo does not get his team to the postseason this year, there's a case for him to be let go. Because as much as I love Torey Lovullo, and I've talked about how I enjoy Torey Lovullo from a leadership standpoint, from a specifically an emotional leader standpoint, like the way he galvanized the troops, especially the postseason last year. Like, he's a manager that wears his heart on his sleeve. He's an emotional roller coaster of a guy sometimes. Like, you saw him cry after the D-backs lost the World Series last year. Like, I like that. He's a real manager's coach, a real players manager's coach. Like, I think all the guys respect him. I think all the guys like him. I think all the guys play hard for Torey Lovullo. I think the problem is with Torey, we always don't agree with his decision making, right? We've talked about it a ton on this podcast with his lineups and the times where he puts certain guys, right? We always say stack your team with the best players at the top, and Torey Lovullo a lot of times does not do that with his lineups, especially when you see teams like the Dodgers who are starting like Mookie Betts or Ohtani as their leadoff hitter. And then you watch the Phillies and like your first 2 hitters are Schwarber or Bryce Harper, and you look at the Yankees and you face Judge and Soto early. You look at all these teams across baseball and all their best players at the top of their lineup. And for the D-backs, we see Eugenio so many times batting 7th when he's been like the best player in his league for like multiple months now. We'll see so many lineups when Carroll's on fire, he's at the back of the lineup. Same with Jake McCarthy. And so for Torey Lovullo, we always have questions when it comes to the lineup. We have questions when it comes to his decision making in the pen, right? Sometimes sticking too long with the Paul Sewalds, going with the bad guys in high leverage situations at times with, the relievers you don't trust. Sometimes you don't see enough the good relievers, right? That was a point of topic in the Dodger series. How come we didn't see more of the Pucks and the Ginkles and the Thompsons? And so for Torey Lovullo, there's also been questions of his overcommitment to guys who are like the Jace Petersons, right? The guys who you don't trust, who should not really be there on the major league roster. Sometimes he's overcommitted to the platoon splits. Like, we all know the weaknesses of Torey Lovullo and all the gripes that we have with Torey Lovullo, right? All the things that make us upset when it comes to Torey Lovullo, because sometimes we feel like he's over reliant on his philosophies and doesn't always go by the feel of the game or just what your eye test tells you, what the numbers tell you. Sometimes he just cares about that righty versus lefty split. And so I've had a lot of disagreements with Torey Lovullo over the last couple of years and a lot of questions about, is he really the best D-backs manager? Is he the best manager for the job? And he's done a great job. I can't take it away. I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago where I made the argument that Torey Lovullo should be in the conversation for manager of the year. But I also believe we could upgrade that position and be better. I do think the D-backs could use a better manager. I do think the D-backs could have more wins depending on who the manager is. Like if the D-backs manager was like Craig Counsell, if it was like Alex Cora, like I do think this D-backs team could be even better. And so for Arizona, if they struggle the rest of September and have a bad collapse where they miss out on the postseason, they get passed by like the New York Mets or the Atlanta Braves after adding more talent this offseason, after spending so much money, making trades at the deadline. They did all that to upgrade this team and then missed the postseason. I think we would have to sit down and have a conversation and say, hey, should Torey Lovullo be brought back next year? Like, should we just give him the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, I know it was a bad 3 weeks end of the season, but you're still our guy, Torey. You'll figure it out. You get us back on the horse next year. I'm not too sure if it should be that easy. I've always felt like Torey Lovullo was always just like an all right manager. Like I said, liked him from the emotional standpoint, the X's and O's, not too sure about that. So I've always had some questions about Torey Lovullo. And after seeing this D-backs team play so well for so long, if they peaked in July and August and used up all their juice before September and then get super cold over the next few weeks and miss the postseason, I think we should have a realistic conversation about Torey Lovullo's chances of returning to Arizona next year, because right now, like I've said a lot, this is the team with enough talent to win the World Series. The lineup, I think, is good as any lineup in baseball, especially when they're healthy. They're as deep as anyone. The rotation, the bullpen, as deep as any time it's ever been in franchise history. This team is loaded with talent, and if it misses the postseason, I think it's an absolute failure by everyone in the organization. I do think something would have to be done about it. I think Ken Kendrick, the owner, would be very upset after putting all this money in the D-backs to only see them collapse as we got closer to the postseason. That would be very frustrating to see. So for Torey Lovullo, the seat is definitely getting warm. Right now, as long as the D-backs are in the wild card race, he's fine. But in 2 weeks, if we're a week out from the postseason and the D-backs are on the outside looking in of the playoffs, trying to scratch and claw their way back in, yes, that seat would be hot for Lovullo. And if the D-backs miss the postseason, maybe heads should roll at that point, and maybe Torey Lovullo should not come back to Arizona next year if the D-backs miss the postseason. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.